Heffernan. We're delighted to have Ian as a regular contributor to talk to us live. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Ian is a well-respected strategist and leadership advisor, a seasoned entrepreneur. Yes, he doesn't just lecture on it, he's done it and does it, a prolific consumer of text, and a sought-after book critic. So let's get into this evening's book. Ian, can you tell us why you chose this book? Why did you choose this book, Ian?
The first clue is whenever you see a book written by Margaret Heffernan, it's worth reading. She writes beautifully. Her prose is superb, and she's an extraordinary intelligence. If you want to just get a quick hint of how she comes across, she has a number of TED Talks, and you can just see this lady, erudite, competent, confident, and she's always got very clever ideas to expose. So that's worthwhile. I think that I chose this book as well because the idea of we're living in uncharted times. I think that it'd be fair to say that whether it's on your personal level or in your business life, uncertainty is absolutely inherent in everything we do. And why this is important for business people is because we've all been taught the basis of good management is you have to be able to forecast accurately. To do that, you better plan meticulously. You've got to execute efficiently. You should use models and technology to make well-informed estimates. And that's what a good manager does, a good leader. If that ever was true, that you should be able to forecast accurately, plan meticulously, and execute efficiently, if that was ever true of what made a good manager, today that's remarkably naive, Linda.
Okay, all right. And the reason that you would believe it's naive?
Is because the world has moved from a complex world to a very complicated world. We're no longer just living in a complicated world. We're living under extreme complexity. And there is a difference between those two words, complexity and complication.
Okay, so I think it would be useful if you could explain the difference to us.
Let's do that quickly. There are many things that we deal with in life all the time which are very complicated. Think of a manufacturing plant. It's a very, very complicated process, but it's linear. It follows rules. It's predictable. One machine will do this. This is the speed at which it'll do it. It'll produce that. The next machine must do that. This is the heat. It's all very interconnected, but it can be planned, it can be managed, it can be repeated, it can be controlled. And by the way, it can get more efficient over time. That's complicated. Complexity is completely different. Complexity is firstly non-linear, and complexity is fluid. A very, very small issue can have an outsized impact. You could even have something as small as a virus messing up the entire planet Earth. If you look at systems we live in now, they are so complex. The best example I can give you is this one. The Bank of England. Now, the Bank of England isn't a hokey bank. It is a bank in one of the most important financial capitals of the world. And the Bank of England said there will be a future banking crisis, but they can't tell you when, and they can't tell you why. Now, is it because they lack data? Is it because they're not working hard enough? Is it because they're not clever? They're all of those. They're very clever. They have masses of data, and they're very thoughtful people. The problem is that global systems today are extraordinarily complex. There's a multitude of factors, and every one of these hundreds of factors influences every single other one. And none of the factors that influence our world profoundly are resting in one person or one company or in one nation. It's beyond any person, company, or nation's influence or control. Trump, he tweets unpredictably, and all of a sudden, stock markets move, or the The supply chains between countries change. A new virus creates a pandemic. The fact is that we've tried to reduce costs in complex supply chains all the time. But how do you control a complex supply chain that feeds the world, that moves goods and services around the world, when they can easily be exposed to natural disasters that you didn't expect? They can be affected by labor disputes. They can be affected by economic volatility. They can be affected by social turmoil, by religious strife, by trade wars, by political discontent. Anything at all can disrupt this. So it's not like a machine in a factory. It's this incredible complexity, and that's the life we're living in at the moment, Linda.
Yes, it would seem then that it's important to have a different method to project or work differently. So how does one think forward, and how does one think ahead in this situation, and why is that different to previously?
Let's just have a look at the previously part of your question first. If you looked at how we used to work out what we needed to do, in the past we would forecast. We'd have cleverer people doing good forecasts, and they would be in the newspapers. These people would be university trained people, clever people who would forecast for us what's going to happen. There's a very interesting professor, Philip Tetlock. He teaches at Wharton. I'm not sure who he was always teaching, but he's now teaching at Wharton. And he's done a longitudinal study on forecasting. He's looked at what people said 10, 15 years ago is going to be happening. And then he has a look at how much of all the different things they've said, not with necessarily the 10 or 15 year program, but a year or two ahead even. How much of the stuff that people have said is going to happen in the future, that we predict to happen. We're talking about smart guys, the people who are paid to do predictions. Over the last 20 years of studying these predictions, what he concluded was this. Firstly, their predictions are about as valid as a monkey throwing a dart at a dartboard, on average. What that means is some of them were very accurate and some of them were just wild, complete nonsense. On average, they were nonsense. But there were a couple of people who were very good. In fact, he found that the more famous you are, the more likely you are to be wrong. The reason for that is because famous people seem to stick to their model or their pattern of thinking and don't change it. And the ones, by the way, who were most likely to be right are ones who had much more fluid minds and seem to change their opinions all the time. Of course, if you're an expert in something, you don't change your opinions all the time. But they did. So forecasting doesn't work. We've tried that. Some people seem to think, well, let's look at historical precedent. The flu epidemic of 1918 is like what we've got today. The Great Depression of the 1930s was like what we had in 2008. These things are misleading, and they really don't enlighten at all. They're only aesthetically pleasing analogies. The fact is, history never, ever repeats itself. That's complete nonsense. If something happened before, when something that looks aesthetically like that happens again, it happened under different conditions because the second condition has already been affected by the first. Then you've got these. We come up with a lot of facts. I think there's a lovely one. Let me just share this with you. In 2013, two Oxford researchers did a study, and they said that in 23 years' time, 47% of jobs will disappear. I'll say that again. 23 years' time, 47% of all the jobs you know today will not be here anymore. This prediction was taken very seriously. Imagine you're a government. What do we do about our society? What do we do about our people? It was even discussed at Davos. Then you think for one second, seriously? With an accuracy of 47%, not 46, not 49, in 23 years' time? That's complete nonsense. In fact, there was an OECD's a club of really rich guys, rich countries. And they did a study, and they estimate only 9% of jobs are actually automatable at all. So this idea of trying to predict the future in the traditional way we've always done is extraordinarily difficult. The fact is, Galbraith, the economist, he put it very nicely. He says the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. It's harder now than ever before, I think, to predict the future, and the future is always difficult to predict because it hasn't happened yet. That's why this is that's what we used to do in the past, Linda. It's just what we can't do anymore.
So that leaves us with the question, how do we deal with this? Do we look at it from the point of view and say, well, let's be optimistic about it? Do we be realistic about it? Do we be pessimistic about it? How should we feel about it?
I think the first thing to accept is that optimists aren't idiots. There's a couple of things. We don't know what to do. The fact is that optimists have better lives than pessimists. These are the facts. Optimists live longer, optimists are healthier, and optimists have more successful lives. Optimists don't ignore problems, and they don't give up easily because they think, well, we'll always be able to conquer this. They're more likely to reach out for help. They're more likely to collaborate. They're more likely to trust people. People who are optimistic are more likely to trust people than pessimists. And the fact is, optimism seems to multiply our capacity and make us more resilient. So the correct attitude, I think, Linda, has definitely got to be optimism.
Well, that's brilliant. And how does one go about that? What are the solutions to achieving that feeling, and how should we think to achieve that?
I think that what we've got to do is we have to start thinking differently about living. Let me make it very broad and we'll get more specific. I think we've got to, all of us, I'm talking about our individual lives, have got to think about life as an adventure. Now, the beautiful thing about an adventure is that it's scary, it's interesting, it changes all the time. And I think that the best way to think about life and living is that this is one giant experiment. Now, I think this is quite an important point. If we treat all parts of our life as experiments, we don't know what is right. We don't know what's the right thing to do. So if you think of it as an experiment, you don't say, well, my philosophy is to do it this way. My approach to child rearing is that way. You say, look, I'm going to experiment. Listen, I'll cut the kid a lot of slack. If it turns out that's good for, fine, we'll keep going that way. As soon as it's not, I'll change. So it's living your life as if it's an experiment. In an experiment, you prototype a future of what you think. And because it's only a prototype, it's only an experiment, you can't see the whole of complex systems anyway. So you probe, if it works, terrific. If it doesn't work, then we rethink it. But generally, we expect our leaders to be serious people who make decisions and they stick to them. And I think that now the most important part of this is no, don't stick to it. Absolutely everything that you possibly can think of must be seen as an experiment. And that's how I think we have to do it, Linda.
I think that you've got a good point there, because I think so often what we do is we create an expectation, and when that expectation isn't met, we're disappointed. And so what you're saying is don't have an expectation, just have an experiment in mind. Is that the only solution, or is there more?
No, I think there's another very, very important solution. And the other important solution is, let me give you an example of one. If you think of Finland, I would say that most people had never really thought of Finland until Nokia came along. It's almost as if Nokia invented Finland. The world seemed to understand them. And for a while, as you probably know, Nokia was like the telephone. I think that very, very small phone you used to have was a Nokia, wasn't it? Tiny little phone you once had many years ago. Anyway, the Nokia was so powerful as a company. It was worth as much as all of the Finnish companies put together. It was the darling of the world until it wasn't. What happened was that it failed. It missed things. Its culture its management culture became a liability, not an asset, and basically fell over. And they were frantically trying to find a single perfect plan, which included, by the way, selling out to Microsoft, which went nowhere. Eventually, I just try to imagine this was a huge organization employing thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. And this thing was going to fall apart, and they built it all together. They were proud of it. They worked it. They loved it. And it was only when because they were prepared to sacrifice so much to make it work, that they got the acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent, and now Nokia is a giant it's one of the top 3 telecom infrastructure companies in the world. Now, I use that example because if you try and work out why did Nokia succeed, from all we know about why they succeeded was mainly because they were so committed to making it happen. Not a person, everybody who was involved said, this is not my company. This is not the place I work. This is us. This is what makes us a community. And it's very, very easy to forget that at work, we're human, and that work is emotional. And that over time, this is an important point, over time, teams get stronger. And because they get stronger, they become more loyal, more open, more trusting, more robust. One of the things that we have failed to do in work, and this is why I say it's an important point. One of the things we have failed to do in work is to build friendships and collegiality. You cannot get through crisis. You cannot get through crisis unless people work as a team. In a crisis, no one exchanges business cards. We have to know that I can rely on him. I would never drink with a guy. I think he's a madman, but I can rely on him. I know who he is. I understand. We've worked together for 20 years. We know what's going on. This idea of having friendships at work is extraordinarily important. What's happened is that we're moving into the gig economy. You go from one gig to another gig to another gig. In the gig economy, friendships are not possible. Friendships are only possible over a long time with people you know and who trust you. There was an interesting report by a professor, and whose name has just escaped me. He was teaching at Harvard, and one of his part-time, they all do consulting work. What he was doing was he was consulting to Wall Street traders, trade departments. This is before the crash. And he said what would happen is during the frothy days before the crash, they would work hard all day and then party like mad. All of them would go out together and party like mad at night, and they would be it. He says as soon as the crash happened, he said you could watch these people. They all went home alone in silence, just when they really, really needed people. I think that's only when you've got friends who you can talk about the business with that you can get through important crises. My example in my companies, I always tell people we actually have a thing called the Green Apple Award. Green Apple Award is the award we give to somebody who was prepared to squeeze apple juice out of green apples with their bare hands. And you always go through times when you need people terribly badly. That doesn't happen unless they're a society, unless they're a community. And I think one of the things we have to worry about is we have to worry about ensuring that the people that work with us are people who feel that they are a community of people and that they have a commitment to each other because they're there for the long haul and it's not a gig. That's what I think it is, Linda.
Yeah, so it pretty much changes the reality, and collaboration and relationships is the strategy. That's what I'm understanding from what you're saying there. So that's really, really brilliant insights. And this is the content and the context of the book by Margaret, Ian.
Yes,
I think it would be.
There's a lot more, but this is some of the ideas that I thought were just fabulous ones.
Oh, that would be fantastic. So we'll definitely make sure that it's up on the bottom. You can have a look on the comments below, and we'll put in the name and the author, the name of the book and the author and the ISBN. And other than that, Ian, thank you so much for your insights and your time, and we'll be back in a week's time.
Indeed.
Have you got any idea of what we're going to be looking at next, or am I asking too soon?
Too soon, because the next book I've just finished reading one now, and so the next book I'm going to read, I have to still select, and then maybe the one I'd love to share with you.
Oh, good. Well, we're all looking dreadfully forward to that. So, just to everybody, if you found this useful, please hit the like button, subscribe, follow, and share. And more importantly, talk to us, especially with Ian, and you can complete a consultation form if you want to get hold of Ian, and you can get hold of him on his contact details, which we'll also list below. Thank you for your time and good afternoon. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.